We need to do more of that now as Americans. You know, the Declaration of Independence was our mission statement. It is our mission statement. The second president of the United States, John Adams, said that he hoped that every July 4th we would revisit first principles. Now those first principles, right now, they're written on marble walls, they're inscribed on marble walls, and they're written on parchment behind glass. But if they're not in our hearts, then they lose their moral force. And if a principle isn't within you, you know, in the Jewish religion it says every generation must discover God for itself. Every generation must rebond with democracy. And so it is important that we realize these principles die if they're not alive in us. We've all heard them, we all know what they are. But to genuinely, psychologically, and emotionally revisit them changes your life. Number one, we all know this, all men are created equal. Number two, God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. Number three, governments were instituted to secure those rights. And number four, which is particularly juicy, is that if the government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Those are radical. America is a radical idea. Democracy is a radical idea. It has been dejuiced in our time. Now in 1776, when a group of 56 men, most of them young, signed the Declaration of Independence, they were doing something extraordinary on this planet. They were also risking their lives to sign it, because if the British had won the war, they would have been executed as traitors. On one hand, that's where it starts. On the other hand, that's where it got gnarly. Because these men who established aspirational, enlightened principles more profound than had ever been written into any founding document, 41 of them were slave owners. So that characterological dichotomy is built into the American character. It's been with us from the beginning. We're both. We are both a country that is based on the most aspirational and enlightened principles of possibility for the human being that has ever been positive. It was a light unto the nations, and when we practice what we preach, it's still a light unto the nations. And we have been, from the very beginning, and in part in every generation, including ours, the most violent perpetrators of transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand. That's our story. Now, every generation decides for itself what's the chapter we're going to write in that story. Now, if you look at the ongoing narrative of American history, we do, as the line goes, bend towards justice. But it's never a straight line either, because sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we did respond to slavery with abolition. We did respond to the oppression of women with 2 major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. We did respond to institutionalized white supremacy and segregation with the civil rights movement. We did respond to the inability and oppression of gay people with the marriage equality movement. There is a rising realization of not only the genocide and the cultural annihilation, but the continuing injustice towards Native Americans, with how many of us standing up at Standing Rock, and the list goes on. But in other ways, in our time, we're also sliding backwards. Mass incarceration means we're sliding backwards. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing means we're sliding backwards. Chipping away at the Voting Rights Act means we're sliding backwards. So our job as citizens, it seems to me, is to understand where are we in the line of history? What's happening in our generation? What's happening in our generation is not that different than what has happened in other generations. A lot of what is happening today is just the newest iteration of some very oppressive and tyrannous forces. Turns out that the American Revolution is an ongoing process. It turns out that we were very naive as a people to consider democracy a done deal. We were very naive to just consider it done, to figure it had been established, and so we didn't really need to do much. Other people would take care of all that. But when you think about it, if you don't take care of your body, can you really be that shocked if you end up sick? And if you don't take care of your relationship, can you really be that shocked if the other person leaves? And if you really don't take care of your money or your business or your schoolwork, can you really be shocked if it goes down? And that's what is happening to us. I don't believe that Donald Trump created all of our biggest problems. I believe that Donald Trump was created by these deeper problems. These deeper problems have been accumulating for 40 years. And for those of you who are young, it's very interesting about age. I'm in my 60s. And what I have learned about age, and what we all learn as we age, is that every decade is like a room in a house. And you're in the room you're in. And you're no longer in the room you weren't in before. And you're not yet in the room you're going to be in next. But every room has its own magic. Every room has its own gifts. Every room has its own power. I think the older you are, the more you know some things. The younger you are, the more you know other things. If you're young, you know what's happening now. But if you're older, you have a sense of what continues to happen and what the patterns are as you go through history. And one of the things that they talk about in mythology, etc., which you really understand as you get older, is that the elders in a society are the keepers of the story. So there's something I want all of you who are students now or student age to know. It wasn't always like this. Now, I'm not romanticizing the past. I'm not romanticizing any chapter of American capitalism. But it's very important for those who weren't alive to actually experience how it was happening, to know what happened in this country in the 1980s. I know this is going to shock you, but before the 1980s, the American corporation was actually expected to care. So if somebody had worked for the corporation for decades, the corporation, the social agreement was that the corporation was actually expected to care if that person had a dignified retirement. It's not like America always had moral authority in its foreign policy. It's not like America always stood for freedom and equality the way we know we're supposed to. But there was a time in my lifetime when at least the consensus was we knew we were supposed to try. But what happened in the 1980s was that a very amoral economic system got this country by the throat. Because trickle-down economic theory was the notion, and is the notion, that the only responsibility of the corporation should be financial, fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders, even if that's at the expense of the workers, expense of the community, expense of the environment. Now, interestingly enough, Milton Friedman, who was the main articulator of trickle-down economics, he himself said, but of course this will only be safe if we have a universal basic income.
Oh, really?
Isn't that interesting? But the promulgators up, and they got president, and they got Senate, and they just took it was unbelievable what happened in the space of a decade. And what happened was the idea that all this money would be made. You see, this wealth inequality did not exist in the 1970s. So this massive transfer of wealth began. And the idea that all that money that would end up in the hands of the stockholders, it would all trickle down and it would lift all boats. Well, I think after 40 years, it's pretty clear the jury is in. It not only did not lift all boats, it left millions of people without even a life vest. It has destroyed America's middle class, and it has left 1% of Americans owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, Louis Brandeis, the Supreme Court Justice, said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. Because what happens when you've got that much concentrated wealth in the hands of a few, and particularly when that concentrated wealth is mainly expressing itself politically through corporate power, what you have is a regression to an aristocratic paradigm. Because instead of the old lords and ladies of old England. Now it's health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, chemical companies, food companies, oil and gas, defense contractors. They're like a new aristocracy. And here you have Abraham Lincoln, who stands on the battlefield where these men thousands of men had died at Gettysburg, and he said that they died so that a government of the people, and by the people, and for the people, would not perish from the earth. I'm running for president, and I'm talking to you today because we all need to get this. It's perishing now. We've become a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people, of multinational corporations, by multinational corporations, and for multinational corporations. As soon as we started making the businessman God, why are we so surprised that the most twisted, perverted form you can even imagine of that image has risen up to prevail upon us? So, this is the deal. It's not an immoral economic system, it's an amoral economic system. But an amoral economic system has produced immoral consequences. I'm running on the pillars of a moral politics. One of the things I love about talking to young people is how many of you were not even born in the 20th century? Exactly. Why should you be burdened by the mistakes of the 20th century? The 21st century mind. Don't carry it over. That's part of growing up. That's part of growing up. It's part of individuation. What did my parents do? What did those who came before me do that I want to actually do even better? And what is it that they did about which I say, that stops right here? And there are the ideas of the last 20 years of American politics is riddled with bad ideas. They need to stop right here. We need to go back to the original principles of this country and apply them for our time. We need an integrative approach to politics. This is the 21st century. We don't think of we're a whole person approach. 21st thinking is much more holistic. It's much more whole person. You don't just address allopathically what's happening. That's what's happening. That's why we become Stepford citizens. It's a Stepford politics. They tell us we're even told what the issues are. Not just propagandized for how you feel about the issues. We're even told what the issues are. They tell us what the issues are. Has anybody been polled? Anybody asked you about poverty? Anybody asked you about child poverty? Anybody asked you about the military-industrial complex? I bet not. So this is the deal. I want to move through this quickly because I know that Connors wants me to put out questions and we'll talk among ourselves. So this is the deal. First of all, obviously, and I'm not anti-capitalist. I know there's a lot of conversation about capitalism and socialism. I don't believe, me personally, I do not believe that capitalism is inherently oppressive. I don't actually. But there is a virulent strain of capitalism, a predatory capitalism that, as I said before, corrupted our government, and it has hijacked our value system because it is completely untethered to any kind of moral or ethical consideration. So we need to get that back on track. And getting that back on track, my ideas are very similar to Bernie and Elizabeth, very similar. I'm just a left-wing progressive Democrat economically. Repeal the 2017 tax cut, put back in the middle class, stop with the corporate subsidies, like $26 billion alone last year to oil and gas. That $2 trillion tax cut, 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest corporations and individuals. You get back to the United States government the right to negotiate for drug prices. You look at the military budget, you say everything the military actually needs, they get. Everything on top of that, hundreds of billions of dollars that only have to do with short-term profits for defense contractors, that goes. You say to 3%, you say to billionaires, many of whom did make their money in a very righteous way. Good for you guys. We'd like 3%, please, on your assets. And you say to people who have 50 million or more, once again, if you made it righteously, good for you. We'd like 2% on that. And then I think at a time like this, it's extremely important for us to remember how many people with that kind of wealth agree with us. No socioeconomic group has a monopoly on values or concern for this country, and I think that's really important that we remember that. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard, any more than every poor person is noble and pure. So we want to be careful, because we have to be so deep in our own sort of purification of heart if we're going to have the kind of nonviolent revolution that we do need to have in this country. Secondly, we need to say, okay, we do all the things I just said, we're going to have some cash on hand. What are we going to do with the cash? We have millions of American children who live in chronic trauma. We have 43 million hungry Americans, 13 million of them are children. We have American children who go to elementary school and ask the teacher if you have some food for me. Last time I was in New Hampshire, in northern New Hampshire, I was told by political and business leaders there that 25% of the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. We have millions of American children who go to schools and classrooms where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. We have millions of American children who have a form of PTSD that psychologists say is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq. Their despair has simply been normalized by the political establishment. There's a reason for that, because they're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. They're no more useful to the political establishment than they are to a predatory form of capitalism. So, because how do they serve it? So whether it's young people or whether it's old people, they just get kind of dropped by the wayside. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage, so how can they possibly compete with the clout of the corporate forces whose money dominates Washington? We should be rescuing these children, no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. And if I'm president, that's why I want an entire Department of Children and Youth to coordinate all the efforts. We need more. This is more than educational funding, which obviously we need. It's more than universal preschool, which obviously we need. But we need community wraparound services. We need nutrition. We need to deal with the child poverty, child hunger. We need to deal with anti-bullying. We need to deal with trauma-informed education. We should have mindfulness in the schools. Ladies and gentlemen, the very fact, and everyone else, the very fact that we base our school funding primarily on property taxes is so immoral. And this needs to change. Because if you're a country that's the richest country in the world, which we are, and you are withholding education from anyone, that is a passive form of oppression. And remember what I said about revisiting our first principles. What about all this, God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? These children are not having their right to pursue happiness secured. The next thing we need to do is a World War II. And by the way, I want to go back to the education thing. What you have is 40% of all Americans living in chronic economic trauma and anxiety. They don't know what they'll do if they get sick. They don't know what they do if one of their kids gets sick. They don't know how they'll send their kids to college, and they don't know how they will get out of under these college loans. Cancel it all. You just cancel it all. Everybody acts like it's so complicated. You have a $1.5 trillion student loan debt. You have a $2 trillion tax cut, which we haven't even proven will pay for itself. I say cancel the loan completely. Just cancel it completely. Putting it in the hands of a very, very, very few people. And that will be an economic stimulus. You give it to the people. This is where money comes from. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. Uncap people's dreams, unleash people's spirit. There's nobody in this room who doesn't deep in your heart want to do something great. We're born with that. And society should help you do that, and then society will be better off, including monetarily. And just wrapping that up one more time with the children, if you really want to take care of your economy 10 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. because there's nothing. There's nothing in the sky, nothing in the wind, nothing in the sun, nothing in the ground that can equal in energy to fuel what we need in the 21st century more than the brain of every child in America. We're going to need a World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change. Nothing short of that is going to do. I think a lot of people in this room are probably very well aware of what we could be facing if we do not do that. Massive social collapse, the like of which we have not seen in the modern era, whether it be food shortages, whether it be economic collapse, whether in crises, whether it has to do with whole swaths of continents and countries where the heat is such that the land is basically uninhabitable, you can't grow food shortages, etc. We're going to need a massive World War II level of mobilization in order to make it happen. The next thing I feel very strongly about is that no country any more than an individual can have the future that you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. It's time. Racism is the original character defect in the United States. The Jews, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement. Catholics go to confession. People in an AA meeting, you have to admit the exact nature of your wrong. Take a fearless moral inventory. America needs to do this. Let's pay reparations for slavery. Along that same line, we have some reparative measures to take towards Native Americans in this country. With them, it's a more complicated issue. We're talking about unfairly negotiated treaties that we've broken, giving back the Black Hills of South Carolina, of South Dakota, obviously the pipelines and so forth. And then the last thing, I'm sort of rushing through these because I know we want to get to questions and then we can talk in detail about anything you want. The last thing has to do with our national security agenda, and I already mentioned it. And I think one of the oddest things about this campaign is that Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only ones who even talk about this. We have a national security agenda that is so based on constant and repeated preparation for war. That's like saying, I'll just take a bunch of medicine, but I don't have to cultivate health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. But what we have is the national security agenda, just doing some math here, makes it all very clear. $760 billion a year on the military. We all know how I do twice that of everybody else just below that number. Our State Department gets $40 billion. State Department is long-term development, diplomacy, mediation. Within that $40 billion, $17 billion goes to USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then also within that $40 billion, less than $1 billion goes to the peace-building agencies. Now, what do the peace builders do? Peace-building skill, and I'm sure there are peace builders who are in this room. Peace-building skill is just as sophisticated a level of expertise as is military skill. And in some places in the world, it takes just as much courage to exhibit it. There are 4 factors which statistically prove that when they are present, there is a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. Not going to surprise anybody what they are. Number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 2, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. What do you think these people in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala were doing? What do you think some of the people who have moved have been ideologically captured by genuinely psychotic forces such as terrorists in other countries? This is what human desperation does. But for us to help desperate people does not produce corporate profits. For us to buy something like 100 B-21 Raiders for $560 million each, they all drop not only conventional weapons, but also nuclear weapons. We need 100 airplanes that drop nukes. You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's probably over for the species. Because every nuclear bomb that exists today makes the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima look like pinpricks. But this is where it lies, ladies and gentlemen. This is where it lies. We're not even talking about it. You made me president, better believe we're going to talk about it, and we're going to have a U.S. Department of Peace, because the leaders of the peace agencies should have an equal place at the table of power in securing our national security. If it's just on the level of policy. Because in order for everything to happen that I have mentioned here, there's going to have to be an awakening of the American people. There's going to have to be a reclamation of our power. We're going to have to recognize that we, the people, are the immune system in the body politic. The body can take quite a large amount of injury and assault as long as the immune system is working. And democracy can take quite a large amount of assault and injury as long as the immune system is working. The citizens are the immune system. I think in many ways we have to take responsibility for the fact we were plagued and we allowed it to happen. Because anytime you think, well, somebody else is going to handle that, oh, they handled it. And now we are so off course. And we are off course in a way that other generations have been off course. I mean, other generations, however, rose to the occasion. We had slavery in this country, and a generation rose up, and they abolished it. We had suppression of women in this society, and we had a generation with the women's suffragette movement that rose up and changed that. We had segregation and institutionalized white supremacy in this country. A generation rose up and changed that. The government, in not any of those cases, decided to change things. People rose up. People rose up. People stepped in, and they caused the change. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're dealing with today is no different than any other generation. The same level of undemocratic assaults and erosive and corrosive ideas and forces that would undermine our democracy. We're not having to deal with anything any more intense than other generations have had to deal with. Let's just not be the first generation that wimps out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track.
So I think we're going to open it up for questions now, but thank you, Marianne, for that wonderful speech. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and either Sage or Caroline will come and find you with the microphone. All right, so it looks like we have one over here.
Hi, so I've been following your campaign, and I love that you're running as sort of like an outsider candidate. You've shown us that you're very good at running for president. You speak wonderfully. You're running as an outsider candidate without very much public policy experience. Someone who's not part of the government. One could call you the Democratic Donald Trump.
No. Boo.
Yeah, but I'm wondering is, do you have the big one of the big things besides malicious hatred that he has is a lack of profound understanding of the repercussions of what we do now, a lack of deep understanding of policy, a lack of deep understanding. I'm also wondering about international issues. Do you have that kind of profound understanding of the intricacies of the world and the U.S.'s place in it?
Okay, so first of all, I believe I do, but I want to go back to your very question. This is America. There's not supposed to be a frickin' outsider. Well, outside what? Outside what? It's an elite within an elite. It's a Wizard of Oz thing. So the Constitution says that in order to be, where is that lady? Okay. In order in order to be president, these are the things you have to have. You have to have been born here, check. You have to be over 35, check. And you have to have lived here for 14 years. The founders did not say you have to be a congressman or a senator or a lawyer or a governor. If they had wanted to, they would have. They didn't, because they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself the skill set that they feel is necessary in order to navigate the times in which we live. So this idea of this gatekeeper class, this is un-American right there. I'm outside what? I am an American woman. That's plenty inside. Number two, this illusion of what those people do all day. What do you think a congressman does all day? Half their time is on the phone spending raising money. So when you ask me, and this idea of experience, very experienced politicians led us into Iraq and agreed with the war in Iraq. Very experienced politicians took us into Vietnam. Very experienced politicians got us here. Where we are is not just what Donald Trump has done in the last 2 years. So that issue of separating the people and the wisdom of the people. I am probably more geographically traveled, probably than I'm trying to think everybody's probably not more than Joe Biden because of all his experience as vice president. I'm very geographically traveled. I was saying to somebody in the meeting we had before, when I met a few people who are in this room, who are students in political science here at Tufts, you spend more time thinking deeply and reading deeply about what's going on in this country than the average congressman and senator. And now, I do have great respect. I have great respect for the other candidates. I'm not running against anyone, I'm running with everyone. But I'm not enrolled in this idea that, ooh, they know. On C-SPAN the other day, they said, how did it feel to be on the stage with all these congressmen and senators? I said, how did it feel to them to be on stage with me? And starting at a very young age, I've traveled all over this world. And I'll tell you why I traveled all over the world. When I was in the 7th grade, I came home from school, and I told my parents that my social studies teacher had said that if we didn't fight, there's some of us old enough in this room to remember this, that if we didn't fight in Vietnam, we would be fighting on the shores of Hawaii. That was how that war was sold. It was called the domino theory, that we had to stop the communists in Vietnam, or they would take over all of Southeast Asia, and then they would take over the world. Okay. I said that. My father jumps up, and he says, damn it, that's it. Sweetheart, that's what he called my mother, get the visas. We're going to Vietnam. This was my father, and this was my mother. Oh, Sam. And she did it, and he said, they're not going to eat my children's brains. God damn it, military industrial complex. Actually very seriously, because people would say to my father, why are you taking your children to travel at such a young age? They'll never remember it. And he would always respond, it will get under their skin. And it did. I'm looking at my niece right now, her mother, my sister. We were different people. We became different people than we would have had we not as children seen everybody's the same everywhere. I mean, the problem was not, for instance, just that they invaded Iraq. The equal problem is that the American people allowed it to happen. These people who have done nothing to you, and you're going to just rain fire on their homes. They can't protect their children. They can't protect their husbands, their wives, their friends, their loved ones. And that's just another day. I have something more than experience in foreign policy. I have moral certitude. And that is what is lacking in U.S. government today.
Hi. So speaking of kind of being on stage with the other candidates, you were not in the September debate. You are not going to be in the October debate, and it looks unlikely you'll be in the November debate.
No, how do you?
It's not going to happen. It looks.
No, if you keep showing up for me the way you've been showing up for me in New Hampshire, I have a real good chance of.
That's true. But kind of given the September and October and the talk that a lot of maybe political pundits have been having about winnowing the field, I was wondering what your thoughts kind of on the way that the DNC has been running the lead up to the primaries and the way that they're kind of increasing the restrictions for the debate each time. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on that are as one of the less well-known candidates who has been less assured in getting into the debates every time.
Notice that I got a lot less time to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Even on it.
I was way over there on the left.
Yeah.
It's part of that first political universe that I described to you today. It's a big machine. But you know what? How many of you are voters in New Hampshire?
Yay!
Very funny, actually. The voters in the primary states have the power. That's where the power lies. The power is in the state. That's all part of the theater, you see. There's nothing in the Constitution that even mentions political parties. George Washington warned us against them when he left office, saying that they would become a faction of men who cared more about their faction than their country. This is it on full display. Now, I don't want to be picking a fight here. I mean, I'm having to play the game because you have to do that, but let's be real here. What is the debate? It's this one night. It's not even a debate. It's where everybody just rushes to get in 60 seconds. But you compare that to this, where we're actually having, some getting down and talking about some things. So, yeah, I mean, we know what they did last time, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, let's be, and everyone else, everybody remind me, and everyone else. We know what happened last time. It had to be her, it had to be her. I'm someone who believes that if the DNC had kept their hands off the scale, it would have either been Bernie or it would have been Hillary, but we all would have felt good about it, that we had voted and decided. And then I think the Democrats would have won, whether it was Hillary or Bernie. I sometimes feel like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion because it's the same thing. But this time, okay, it can be one of these five. That's not American to me. That's not American to me. And they go even further than that, as we've seen. Not they specifically, the DNC, but they, the big they, mocking, marginalizing, mischaracterizing. If you're not one of them, you get what they do. And I think it's time for the American people to wake up. Not that we don't know. I haven't said anything today. I might have said some particular details today that you don't know about the B-21 Raiders or whatever. But basically, I didn't say anything today you don't already know. This is not a moment when Americans need to recognize what's happening. We just need to own what we know now and ask ourselves, are we going to do something about it?
Hi. I've been a big fan for a long time. Return to Love audio, I loved that. But so thank you for explaining the trickle-down economy that kind of started in the 80s. When that all started, and so CEOs' bonuses being tied to the profits of a company.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Before, what she's talking about is something actually very significant. It has to do with stock options. For those of you into economics or any of this kind of stuff, before the 1980s, this is very significant what she's saying. Before the 1980s, it was not legal for a CEO to be paid by stock options. And for obvious reasons. As soon as a CEO could be paid with stock options, the CEO has an inherent conflict of interest. Squeeze the worker versus help the worker. It's also, by the way, if anybody here doesn't know, before the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies could not advertise on television. All this stuff happened in the 80s. Yes, ma'am.
I've been thinking about that. My whole life I wanted to be a CEO, right? I wanted to get out of my small...
Get in quick while they still get paid so well, because once I get there...
And then, the protests on Wall Street. I saw that at Yale and these types of universities, and it's devastating, right? And I know that Elizabeth Warren talks a lot about how kind of evil the CEOs are, especially in insurance companies. I'm not 100% sure on your take of that.
I don't think she says they're evil as
Well,
people.
right.
She
Yeah.
wants to hold capitalism accountable, and I totally agree with her.
And I know the EU, I'm not sure where they are on that, but they want to cap CEO bonuses a little bit so they can't get so high. And I guess I don't know what the US can do.
Well, we can do a lot, because right now the average is 1,000 to 1. 1,000, the average CEO makes 1,000 times more. No, my number's wrong. I think 40%, please forgive me, it's either 1,000 to, I was just answering a questionnaire about this. It's either that the average CEO, or is it, anyway, many CEOs in this country make 1,000 times more than the average worker. The conversation is about returning it to where it used to be, which is 100 times more. The general sense of those who want to hold capitalism accountable is that it is fair for a CEO to make up to 100 times more than the average worker. But when you have CEOs making 1,000 times more than the average worker, this is the suck. This is the upward suck of wealth into the hands of the very, very few. This is why the assault on unions is part of the corporatist agenda. And remember, everyone, this is not conservatism. You know, Eisenhower said that the American mind is both liberal and conservative. I myself am a left-wing progressive, but I understand and respect that there are high-minded conservative principles, and at our best, there is a little bit of a yin and yang complementary relationship. Nobody's got a monopoly on truth, and in any situation, you kind of see what principle applies in a particular situation. This corporatist agenda is neither conservative nor liberal. It is amoral. It is tyrannous. It is oppressive. It is un-American. And it is undemocratic. So it's not about liberals versus conservatives. It's not. It's about a way of organizing your society in which market principles are placed before democracy and humanitarian concern. That is dangerous. That separates us from our humanity. It separates us from our humanity. Because they made money, that indigenous tribe is going to be destroyed. Because somebody made some money, the planet is going to be taken to the point where we could be imperiling our survival of the species. Because somebody wants to make a lot of money, our children are going hungry and aren't getting properly educated. At what point do we say, no, that stops now?
Question is right down here.
Hi, Marianne.
And by the way, just to complete that, because I think that we all need to be fair, but I'm sorry, but we really need to get this in. Otherwise, the current politics is too shallow a container for the level of energies and the depth of inquiry we need to have. So all of us need to get this. So what happens when this woman was mentioning this, because this really is the stuff where the rubber meets the road. Before the 1980s, you know, a corporation, this is a publicly given right. They're not gods. They are given this right. And so the idea of government having a say should not, what Trump will do, for instance, and this is important to realize, when in this, no matter who the Democrat is, anything that has the slightest bit to do with regulating the overreach of corporations, which that's all that child labor laws were. That's what the founding of unions were. That's what antitrust laws are. It is an American tradition. It's part of what we do. We push back against overreach by capitalism. This is not something new. But what happens now is if you suggest anything, and all that anybody's suggesting basically is going back to pre-1980s, when they were an important part of our functioning of our society, but they weren't the bottom line. The other side, yells socialism. But it's important to know that there are some very powerful capitalist voices right now who are standing up and showing up because they know that they have to course correct. And they know they have to course correct, not because of me or Bernie or Elizabeth, they have to course correct because they've got a younger generation coming up who's asking themselves, what the hell has global capitalism ever done for me? And they're asking themselves, what am I supposed to be afraid of in socialism, the free healthcare or the free college? Therefore, I do believe this is a very pregnant moment. I feel the same way about reparations. This is actually a pregnant moment. We need what Martin Luther King called a coalition of conscience. So I just want to say, when we start talking about regulating, we're going back to what should be just capitalism held accountable to ethical and moral standards. And when they start yelling socialism, make sure you go, yeah.
Hi, Marianne. First, thanks so much for coming to Tufts.
Thank you.
We've all been really excited for you to come. I only recently started following your campaign, and I really support how you incorporate trauma and poverty into criminal justice restoration, as well as your reparations policy. However, as president and as someone who supports the two-state solution, I'm curious as to how you'd work on eliminating or reducing the billions of dollars in military aid that we give to Israel that inevitably goes towards harming Palestinian people, similar to how Bernie has.
Okay, so which one do you want me to, they went to two very different categories. One had to do with criminal justice here and one had to do with Israel.
Oh yeah,
Which one do you want?
criminal justice was, I was just saying that I really support your
Oh, the
policies
Christian.
on that.
Okay, so you want to talk about Israel?
Yeah.
So I wish to see an equally robust, simultaneous and equally robust American support for both the security, the legitimate security concerns of Israel and the economic hopes, opportunities, and human rights of the Palestinian people. I love my country, but I do not support Donald Trump. That doesn't mean I love America less. I love Israel. I'm Jewish, actually. That doesn't mean that I support Netanyahu. I believe Netanyahu and Trump are two sides of the same person. I do not support the occupation on the West Bank, on the Golan Heights. Occupation for right now makes sense until there is a broker in Syria that you could trust. But what's very important for every American to understand and for Netanyahu to understand, and we need an American president who doesn't just say wink, wink, but makes it very clear to Netanyahu that we understand that according to international law, the fact that you occupy a place does not give you the right to annex it. And if Netanyahu even starts towards the road of annexing any part of the West Bank, we will probably have a third intifada. It's the most horrible thing that could possibly happen. And I also do not support the blockade of Gaza. It doesn't work. It's causing tremendous harm, tremendous human suffering, and tremendous hatred against Israel. So I believe at the deepest level, the answer there is not going to be on the level of any of these things, including the military that you discussed. At the deepest level, the answer is going to be human. Because what you've got is two peoples, who have very conflicting historical narratives. And they have to share the same piece of land. And it's very psychological. If you and I, if you've been through a terrible historical trauma, which in one person's case is you were traumatized by the Nazis, the psychic center of it. And I've been through a terrible historical trauma, which is I've been traumatized by you. So you are so traumatized in your functioning that you literally cannot be present the way you should for the suffering of the other. And I'm so traumatized that I can't even have a listening for your trauma. And the work, the geniuses, and I have met them, they are there, are the Israelis, the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians, the Palestinians, who are doing the work that needs to be done. There is a set of schools, and my niece here and I have a cousin. She's on the board of a set of schools that I visited called the Hand-in-Hand schools. The Hand-in-Hand schools in Israel are so amazing. You know how when you go into an elementary school and you see little colored paper, A, B, C, D, the letters are all written for both languages. There is an Arab teacher and there is a Jewish teacher. Now, if I'm 40 years old and I'm talking one more time about the West Bank, about 1968, about the founding of Israel, and you and I are going at it, you and I We're 40 years old, we're 45, and we get stuck at, but they killed my brother. They killed my brother. Both of us are like, they killed my brother. But when you say to these little children, this is what they do, it's the most astonishing thing to see. So to a little Jewish child, there's a date called Israeli Independence Day. To the Arab child, the Palestinian child, it's called Makba, or Catastrophe Day. What they do with these little children is they teach both. Everything is before the age of 8 years old. We now know about the human brain and what happens with neuroelasticity and stuff before the age of 8 that they didn't even know 50 years ago. It's true not only here, I have seen little children, little kids. So we have one explained. So to her, it's independence because the country, and to her, it was a terrible, terrible day because everything, all these buildings got destroyed. And I've seen these little kids go, oh, I'm so sorry. And they hug. Their brains, their synapses will be different. Now, in terms of policy, I do support the two-state solution. And I know both people on the right and people on the left don't. I do. I don't, people talk about how bad it is, and it is bad that he moved the capital to Jerusalem. On the other hand, they could both have capitals in Jerusalem. The capital of the Palestinian state could be East Jerusalem. So, on the level of policy, I support a two-state solution. The U.S. government could have a lot to do with pressuring for that. And ultimately, I'll tell you this. If I'm president, if you make me president of the United States, we have a meeting at Camp David, and there's the head of the Palestinian Authority, and there's also the head of Israel. There will also be the brave and incredible people that I have met there who are the peace builders, who are the forward thinkers, who know that we can do this. We can do this if we find that place within ourselves. There's a line, the holiest spot on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love. That is going to be the only answer in that part of the world. And if there's any area, any policy, any issue where I feel that my 35-year career in really knowing deeply what happens inside people in crisis and how to transform that, why I believe that my skill set could be helpful, I really believe I could help when it comes to Israel. Thank you.
Maybe both of them.
I'm not sure if I even have a real question. I have a lot of things I want to say to you, but if I had all day. So I read Return to Love about 20 years ago, and it really changed my life. I cannot believe you're running for president. I just cannot believe that someone that shares so many of the things, the values that I have, the vision that I have, the things that I see, that you're running for president, and I'm so grateful. Reparations, I never thought in my lifetime I would ever hear someone talk about reparations, not just talk about reparations, but have a plan for reparations to really...
We still don't need another study.
Yeah, we don't need another study. We don't need another study. And, speaking on behalf of African Americans, if they could hear your message, they would be completely behind you. So as much as you can get in front of them and speak, and I know what the media is doing to you. I followed it, I see. If they could hear you and hear your understanding, hear your compassion, hear your plan, I'm telling you, there's no one else that they would rather vote for. And I see that online. I see when African Americans are hearing what you're saying and they can't believe it, and they are there for you. Oh gosh, so much. This is the first time I ever donated to a presidential campaign, ever. I know you talk about criminal justice reform, and a lot of the candidates have talked about legalizing or letting a lot of the inmates go that are in jail for marijuana crimes.
Absolutely, all of them.
And I just remember watching 60 Minutes like 20 years ago, and this was the beginning of the DNA that they could use to prove whether someone was innocent or not. And so they had a panel of 10 guys. 8 were African American, 1 was white, and 1 was Latino. They were all on death row or something like that, and they were all released because of the DNA that they showed that all these guys were innocent. It was overwhelming, and they were describing these trials and these lawyers where they had little to no evidence that sent these men away for years and years. I mean, 40, 50, these men were 80.
Executed some of them.
Executed some of them. And I'm just wondering, you know, the laws on the books, you talk about the beginning of our history being the virtuous as well as the, you know, slavery being there. And it just seems it's so ingrained in our society, it's hard for me to imagine how to clean it up. And obviously you have to start somewhere, but I'm just wondering how you even feel like beyond reparations, we can really change our society, the laws on the books, our criminal justice system to be there.
This is another area where it helps us to know our history. A lot of this grew out of Richard Nixon coming up with this concept of law and order. He knew there wasn't a problem. There wasn't a problem. He just made it up because he thought it would help him politically. There's a wonderful documentary by Eugene Jarecki. I think it's called In Our House. He is the one who also made Why We Fight. What we have to deal with is a mandatory sentencing. Mandatory sentences are evil. It has taken so much power out of the hands of judges. So we have a problem not only with what happens once people are in. There's a saying, when it comes to the U.S. prison system, it's too easy to get in and it's too hard to get out. We have to deal with it on the front end too, even having to do with standards of police engagement. The Supreme Court has actually given, for all intents and purposes, police greater power to arrest people, to stop people in a black neighborhood than in a white. They don't call it that, but definitely they would just say more high crime neighborhood. We all know what that really means. We also have the issues of lethal force. Most of us have seen places in Europe where we saw they took somebody in. Why they didn't shoot him. I mean, so there are laws in California and in other places. There are so many things. And of course, on the other end, having to do with the kinds of things that we do with people in terms of rehabilitation, our whole prison system. First of all, the very fact that it is a private prison industry, one of the largest urban industries in the United States. So Obama stopped the contracts for federal prisons, but you still have the state prisons. It's just wrong. Prisons should not be a profit-making industry. It's just one of the ways in which people are making huge multi-billion-dollar fortunes on other people's suffering. So there are many people now working on ending the mandatory sentencing. Many retired judges working on this. The good news about this, as with so many things, is that there is a critical mass of Americans who realize, this is why I feel this is such a pregnant moment, that you can speak to people about a season of moral repair. I'm going to be honest with you. It's going to take 20 years for this country to really get back on track, but we can get started in a fundamental. Legalizing marijuana, everybody who's been in jail, not only is everybody in jail for marijuana should be released immediately, but this country owes them an apology. I agree. And people who have been in jail for marijuana come out, there should be tax incentives given to people who would hire them and scrap the box and all of that. To really not, it's like with reparations. You don't just stop kicking. You also have a moral responsibility to say, here, let me help you get back up.
One more question. So we can go right over there. Yeah.
Hi there, Ms. Williamson. Thank you so much for coming to campus. I've been following your campaign for a good amount of time, and I was actually I learned about Mike Rebell's campaign first, and when you
isn't he great?
With him, he's the best. My question is, so we live in a society that is fraught with so much danger and fear, and there's so many people that are completely alienated, both politically and socially, as a result of this. What do you see as the root cause of this alienation?
Well, we need an integrated politics. We need to recognize external issues and internal issues. The internal issues that we're not remembering that we're only here to love each other. But external issue, massive economic injustice. Yes. Massive economic injustice. What we've got is a situation in which the money in politics is the cancer underlying all these other cancers. And it goes back to how I began my talk today. As long as you've got huge amounts of corporate money that are dominating American policy, then the money is going to go for short-term profits for huge multinational corporations rather than the things that will actually enable people to thrive. And whether people are here or whether people are in other parts of the world, desperate people do desperate things. So all of these societal dysfunctions, including the opioid crisis, yes, we can talk about the Sackler family, it's true. We can talk about predatory pharma, and it's true. But we also have to ask ourselves, what have we created that so many people find just getting through the day so painful that they will do anything, even something that potentially self-destructive, to help them get through the day. And the fact that you've got 40% of Americans living with that level of economic anxiety, that's why for me, all domestic and international policy should be based on one core principle. What is it that would help people thrive? Then you'll have peace, then you'll have prosperity, and then our generation will know we showed up like others did. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne Williamson. Can I just have a few minutes of your time, as challenging as it is to follow Marianne? I wanted to thank Connor and Nick. I'm Paul Hodes. I'm a two-term congressman from New Hampshire, and I'm Marianne's New Hampshire State Director. So we're really happy to see you all here, and thank you all for coming. A few things I want to say. There was a question about the debates. We are working as hard as we can to get Marianne into the next set of debates. One of the things that needs is a number of contributions. So we have envelopes which you can use, and you can also go to marianne2020.com, because our contributions come from people, right? It's people all over the country. So whatever you can give, if you can give $1, that would be great. If you have given, please give again. So that's one way you could help support Marianne and help our campaign. I want to encourage you to go to the website, because Marianne has more specific policy on her website than just about any candidate in this race. You can read about all kinds of things that we probably didn't get a chance to cover today. You know, a lot of people ask me, as a former congressman, I was also a national co-chair for Barack Obama in 2008. I was the first member of Congress from an early state to endorse Barack Obama. So a lot of people, thanks, but a lot of people say, so why are you supporting Marianne? If I could have brought any of those people who asked that question here today,
I agree,
to listen to the passion, the fire, the depth, the intellect, the heart, the caring, the courage, and the truth that Marianne speaks, nobody had ever asked that question again.
Woo! Woo!
Now, our campaign is a grassroots, volunteer-driven campaign, and I want to thank Kathleen McDonald and all the Massachusetts volunteers who came today for Marianne. That's what's coming next. And now it's your turn, because New Hampshire's pretty important in the political firmament. And it's close by. It's really close. Now, I'm not going to invite you to come up and vote there. That gets people in real trouble. But I am going to invite you to come and volunteer with us in New Hampshire. How many of you have ever been involved in a political campaign before? Right? Okay, now, for those of you who haven't been, it's really fun. And it's really easy. There are a number of different things you can do. If you come and sign up with us, and Anne is holding up some yellow volunteer sheets. And if you want to volunteer, you can sign up there. We'll be able to get in touch with you. We have a very comprehensive volunteer program. We are, for example, doing a lot of phone calling. We have a sophisticated phone calling program, which you can do together in groups. You can do it from the comfort of your home. It's easy and it helps reach out to lots of people, and that is all coordinated, and you can be trained easily because you're all really smart. And we know that you can do it. We're also doing a comprehensive texting program. Same thing, we can train you and you can work with the campaign as a volunteer to do texting. And finally, there's boots on the ground. Because in New Hampshire, it really matters if you're face-to-face, neighbor-to-neighbor, person-to-person, and we are doing canvassing and literature dropping. So if you would like to volunteer, and we would like to have you, please sign up with Anne. We'll get in touch with you, and you can be part of a groundbreaking, cutting-edge, nothing like it campaign to change the very foundation of our democracy, restore the American spirit, and rebuild the American community. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for coming. Really. Thank you. Take care.